Every year, fans convince themselves that their team is close. One move away, one bat away, one arm away. And sometimes they're right. But most of the time, they're not evaluating proximity, they're evaluating hope. Championship teams don't just get hot, they're built differently long before October begins. So today, I want to zoom out a bit, because the standard isn't just about evaluating the Yankees internally. It's about understanding what championship grade teams actually have in common. Not aesthetically, but structurally. Because when you study teams that win multiple rounds in October, patterns start to emerge. And those patterns align almost perfectly with the pillars we've laid out. Championship teams don't accidentally pass the standard, they're built to. The first thing championship teams have in common, they function when the margin shrinks. They don't need perfect conditions, they can score without home runs, they can prevent runs without strikeouts, and they can win games where nothing looks clean. October isn't played in best case environments, it's played in compressed ones. Championship teams don't panic when space disappears, they're built for it. In 2025, in the playoffs, the Dodgers won the World Series. In each round of the playoffs, they had at least one game that they won without hitting any home runs. They had 5 games in total this past year that they won in the playoffs without hitting any home runs. In the last 5 years, the Yankees only have 2 games that they have won without hitting a home run. You need to be able to win the close games. You need to win the ugly games. You need to be able to win with small ball. You're not going to have the long ball every single game. It's just not going to happen. It's not realistic. But you need to be able to find a way to win those games where you don't hit home runs. The second thing you notice is that stress doesn't collapse their structure. Injuries happen, slumps happen, but championship teams absorb those hits without unraveling. Depth isn't insurance, it's architecture. Now, what you'll see that's common for championship teams is anytime there's any sort of injury, there's a next man up competency. The players who are filling in for injured players are still major leaguers that can contribute to winning. To start the playoffs this past year, the Dodgers catcher Will Smith was injured. He missed 4 playoff games. In those 4 games, Ben Rortvedt filled in for him. He batted .429 in those 4 games. You want to talk about a competent player, a competent backup? Only one player on the Yankees hit for a higher average than Ben Rortvedt in the playoffs, and that was Aaron Judge. For these championship teams, you don't hear explanations when things go wrong, when there are injuries, when there are obstacles. You see structural resilience. Third, championship teams use advantages intelligently. It's not about how much they spend, it's about what spending creates. It creates flexibility in the lineup. It creates defensive layering, bullpen options, platoon advantages. The Dodgers had multiple players the last 2 years where they won the World Series, multiple players who could play different positions. They had players that they could put in at the end of games for defense when they're ahead. They had multiple high leverage arms in the bullpen that they could go to and not need to go to the same guy every single day. They didn't get worn out because they're thin in the bullpen. They spread their money around to create an evenly built team. Great hitting, some power, high on-base percentage, and then multiple power arms in the starting rotation and multiple shutdown relievers. Money should create optionality, not dependency. When advantages shrink your margin for error instead of expanding it, that's not strength. The fourth trait in championship teams is a decision-making consistency. Championship teams don't change their logic when the pressure rises. Their bullpen usage stays logical. The philosophy for their lineup stays intact. And their strategy doesn't panic. They're not switching the lineup every time they lose a game just because they're in panic mode. I mean, the Dodgers had multiple games where they had to come back and they relied on the same players to come through. The World Series, they were down 3-2. They were on the brink of elimination twice. They relied on those same players to come through, and they did. Pressure should test your process, not rewrite it. If your explanations change in October, your process wasn't stable in April. The fifth trait for championship teams, and this is where many good teams separate from champions, their game translates late. The late inning execution is there. The contact versus strikeout balance. You have a lot more people making contact, putting the ball in play, making things happen. Your bullpen has depth. You know that late in the game you have guys that you can rely on when the pressure is on to shut down the bats on the other team. And of course, defensive reliability. If you have a lead late in games, you want to make sure that you have the best fielding team out there to preserve that lead. In the last 3 World Series, there were at least 2 games in which the winning team, the World Series winner, was trailing or tied after the 6th inning and won. In 2025, LA had 3 different games that they won after being tied or trailing after 6. And in 2024, LA had 2 games that they were trailing or tied after 6 that they won. And the year before, in 23, the Texas Rangers also had 2 games in which they were trailing or tied after 6 that they ultimately ended up winning. And 2 games is half the amount that you need to win the whole series. So it's huge to be able to perform late in games in the high pressure situations. Championship teams don't just win games, they win the final 9 outs. October exposes who you trust and how early that trust narrows. And finally, championship teams make uncomfortable decisions before they're forced to. whether that's someone being demoted from a role, changing the lineup proactively before it's way too late, reducing a veteran contribution to the team, and reshaping your bullpen. I mean, this past year, the Dodgers added Tanner Scott, one of the top relievers in the game, to their team after winning the World Series in 2024. He struggled in the closer role. He was there, probably appeared in 40 to 50 games with them. He struggled. And rather than keeping on going to him and using him in high leverage situations in the playoffs, before the end of the season, they decided to switch to another closer. And they ended up winning the World Series. So they're not just sticking with somebody because they're paying him a lot of money. They're not just sticking with him because he's a big name. They're not just sticking with him because of his reputation. They're going with players who are performing. And that's why Roki Sasaki ended up being the closer in the playoffs. And it worked out really well for them. Championship teams don't wait for a collapse. They act at the first structural signal. Comfort is the enemy of championship leverage. And this is where fans feel tension, because uncomfortable decisions hurt. They feel disloyal, premature, even disrespectful. But championship organizations prioritize margin over sentiment. They honor contribution, but they protect trajectory. I remember a few years back when Joe Torre dropped A-Rod down to the 8th spot in the lineup. Unfortunately, it was too little too late, because that season, or not that season, that postseason, A-Rod wasn't contributing. But they literally waited until they were on the brink of elimination to drop him in the lineup. It was clearly a panic move, and it didn't work out. And, you might say that it seemed like they were being disloyal to A-Rod by dropping him down, that it was disrespectful, but he wasn't performing. They should have done that sooner to give them a better chance to win that year. The year that he did produce, he contributed, he was higher up in the lineup, he carried them to a World Series win in 2009. So, when we evaluate the Yankees this season, we're not asking if they're talented. We know they are. We're asking if they share these championship traits structurally. Do they function when margin shrinks? Does stress collapse depth? Do advantages create flexibility? Does logic drift? Does the game translate late? And do they act early? Because championships teams don't reveal themselves in October, they confirm themselves. And the standard exists to identify those traits before the outcomes do. Next episode, we'll start applying this framework more directly as we get closer to opening day. Because once the games start, evaluation gets real. This is The Standard with Brian Leavy.